Before I had kids, I never thought in a million years that I would hug someone or hold someone close or get right in their cute little faces with a little someone who had some snot or some drool just running down their face or any other unknown substance. Before kids, I would run away if that little toddler with that snotty nose would come running towards me. I would duck out of the other way, and I honestly was just afraid of it. Gross, germs. Then I had kids of my own, and I realized that it was completely different. As a parent, you become more desensitized to those things. One, because it's your own kid and you love them and you develop empathy for them and you want to take care of that little life. And two, it just happens so often that you can't get away from it. Now, I just take it as it comes. My daughters are growing up so fast and they don't have that drool anymore. But when they did, I honestly got over it really quickly. I loved them. That's all I had to do, just love them. See, Jesus has this many interactions with people that he could absolutely run away from, but he doesn't. He loves them. He just stays right there, right in that moment with them. And you know that he wouldn't have it any other way. He loves people. In fact, in our passage today, we see Jesus have one of the most bizarre interactions with an individual that we've ever seen, honestly. But he finds himself in just that, a situation that he could absolutely run from, but he chooses not to. Our passage today is found in Mark chapter 5, verse 1. It's written, "So they arrived at the other side of the lake, in the region of Gerasenes. When Jesus climbed out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out of the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the burial caves and could no longer be restrained, even with a chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the chains from his wrists and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night he wandered among the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. When Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him, ran to meet him, and bowed low before him. With a shriek he screamed, 'Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me.' For Jesus had already said to the spirit, 'Come out of the man, you evil spirit.' Then Jesus demanded, 'What is your name?' And he replied, 'My name is Legion, because there are many of us inside this man.' The evil spirits begged him again and again not to send them to some distant place." See, Jesus gets right off this boat, and this crazy lunatic comes running toward him. There are many reasons that Jesus could have just gotten up and ran. One is a crazy man that could be threatening. I would have run. Two, this guy is living in the tombs. He's living in an unclean environment, according to Jewish culture. But Jesus doesn't run. So Jesus could have culturally decided to run for that reason, but he stays in a clean state so he could fulfill the requirements of religious law to that day. But Jesus chooses to stay and lets this man initiate an interaction with him. So as we unpack it over the next few weeks, this is one of the more crazy Jesus stories we've seen in Scripture yet. So if you're ready and willing, let's get this one started. Well, if you like what you're experiencing with Waypoints Go, then we just ask that you would hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and then maybe share it with a couple of friends to continue this conversation.
Thanks, Justin. In the story, we see a man who's possessed, and he's living, for all intents and purposes, he's living in a cemetery. The environment that this man is living in is clearly unclean. It is not a good place to live, even by today's standards, but especially by the standards of the ancient Jewish people. This man is living in a place that is not only physically unclean, but it's also spiritually unclean and culturally unclean. You know, in those days, it was very important that when somebody passed away, that their body would be laid to rest, so to speak, put into a tomb within 24 hours to minimize the contact that people had with a corpse or around a dead body. And this man is living in that environment all the time. And as a matter of fact, as Jewish people, when you were exposed to an unclean body, you had to do some things to become clean, and you had to isolate yourself for a period of time until you were made clean. And this man is living in this environment day in and day out, and in all likelihood, he was from a village nearby, and he probably had a family, relatives, before he became possessed. It's likely that he knew people, had a job in the village nearby. There's even a chance that he had a family, a wife and kids before all this happened to him. But he became possessed, and he was isolated and removed from the community. It says that they shackled him into a cave, into a tomb. And he likely was reliant on other people's mercy for his food and water and those kind of things. I mean, if he's locked up, the only way that he's going to get the things that he needs is by somebody providing those for him. But it also says that he showed superhuman strength, and he broke free from the chains. And in the process of breaking free from the chains, he had an opportunity to leave that area, leave the tomb, leave the cemetery, but he chose to stay there. Now, I don't know exactly why he chose to stay there and continue to live, but he intentionally isolated himself from the others in the village. When this man is confronted by Jesus, the demons that possess him acknowledge Jesus' holiness by calling Jesus, the Son of the Most High. They know who Jesus is. They know that Jesus is God. They even ask for mercy in the name of God. Now, what does asking for mercy in the name of God mean? It means that they prayed. They prayed for mercy. Now, what's important here is they acknowledge Christ and they pray for mercy, but they do not submit to the authority of Jesus. As a matter of fact, it's almost mocking the way they interact with Jesus. There's a lot of nuance to this text that I'm not going to get into, but the tone in which this is written is kind of a mocking tone, the demons toward Jesus. They know who Jesus is. They know that he has the ability to torment them, but they also, in the same way, are kind of mocking him. But what's important here is that there's a difference between acknowledgement and submission. Acknowledging something and submitting to it are two different things. These demons are acknowledging the authority of God. They have for lack of a better term, they have the brain smarts. I don't know if demons have brains, but they have the smarts to know that Jesus is the Son of God, but do they not have the heart faith required to truly fear God in a submissive way, to fear Jesus for who he is, to have faith in him? That's important for each one of us. It doesn't matter how much you know about God. It's the real important thing is, are you willing to put your faith in God? Do you trust God? You must have faith to submit to the authority and follow Jesus. James chapter 2 verse 19 says this, "You believe that there is one God, you do well. Even the demons believe and they tremble." The demons know who God is, who Jesus is. It's not enough to just know something. But what I find most incredible about this story is not the demons' reaction to Jesus, but what this story tells me about myself and about Jesus. When I was a kid, our house had a crawl space, and it was a little space with a small door that you could crawl into. It had one light that hung from the top that you pulled a chain and it lit up, but most of it was totally dark. And it was kind of a scary place. It was dark and it was dingy. And sometimes when I would do something really wrong, I would go into that crawl space and I would hide. And I was afraid to confront my mistakes. And I would hope that I would just all go away. I would isolate myself. I wouldn't run to Jesus because I was afraid. And I thought if I just waited it out long enough, if I sat in that crawl space long enough, maybe if I came out, it would all just be better. It'd all just go away. But that's not the way things work. We all have shame. We all have things that we're holding on to. We all have things that we've done that we wish we wouldn't have done, or things that we wish we would have done that we didn't do. We all have those things. It's what we do in those moments of realization that really matters. We all wish we could take those away, and we would be better if we had never done those. But when we do those things, what's our reaction? For this man, this demon-possessed man, who is alone and isolated, when he sees Jesus, he shows us exactly what we should do. Instead of hurting ourselves, torturing ourselves, and isolating ourselves, what this man does is he sees Jesus from far off, and he runs to Jesus, and he bows at Jesus' feet. He acknowledges the authority of Jesus, and he also has faith to know that Jesus is capable of removing us from our shame, from removing us from our isolation. We all have shame. What we do with it is what matters. Jesus is beckoning us. He's coming towards us, and he's beckoning us to run to him and bow down, to remove that shame and that guilt from us. Only Jesus can do that. And that's what I get from this story.
Well, thank you, Ryan. What an interesting story we have begun to unpack. And I think one of the things when we get to this kind of Act 3 is we make this more personal. How does this relate to our lives? I think it's easy for us maybe to dismiss if there's any sort of personal application. I mean, for the vast majority of us, we don't struggle with a whole influx of demons inside of us controlling us and those sorts of things. It's just not part of our story. And so it might be easy to read this or study this and think, there's no way that this relates. But what I really love is the way that Ryan finished up his section. The shame that this man had to endure, this shame that separated him from the rest of humanity. And honestly, shame is something that every single one of us can relate to. Shame is something that we all experience. And shame became part of the human story from the very, very beginning. I mean, if you look back to our first parents and the beginning of the human narrative, we discover right away that shame enters. And the moment that shame enters, when they choose to sin, what is it that they do? They flee, they run, they hide, they cover themselves up. And it's just like Ryan entering his crawl space. It's just like everything that you and I do. When we feel ashamed, when we feel that kind of embarrassment of, I cannot believe I did that, we hide. We hide from the people who love us. We hide from culture. We try to pretend that everything is completely okay. Brené Brown has this wonderful definition of the word shame, and it says this, that shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed. Therefore, we are unworthy of acceptance and belonging. And I think that's true. I think every moment that we feel that feeling of shame, we feel like somehow we are flawed, that we're unworthy, that we're unable to connect with people. And that is such a powerful thing, because as adults and just as human beings, when we have these moments where we either do something that we perceive as shameful or we experience something that we perceive as shameful, we believe that we cannot connect, that we cannot fit in, that somehow humanity is going to look at us and say, no, I'm sorry, you are too flawed, too broken, too messed up. And so we believe that we cannot find love, that we cannot experience belonging. And the truth is, shame is really about our perception, our belief that how we see ourselves through other people's eyes. And so to combat that, I want to just talk about a couple of things. First of all, that the shame you feel or the shame you perceive about yourself is actually way too inflated. We have an enemy who is just inflating those feelings inside of your mind, inside of your heart, saying and giving you those great lies that you are unable to do that or unable to fit in. And that is really Satan magnifying these feelings inside of you. And the second thing I want to say to you is shame is a lie. It is. Because when we begin to share our shame with each other, we begin to realize that we're not the only ones fighting shame. We're not the only ones who have had moments where we have messed up or we've experienced something that is messed up. And so the more that we share our shame, the more we realize shame does not have power. And finally, third, shame wants to say this is who you are. But no matter what we've done, no matter what we've experienced, shame is just a moment in time. It's an event, it's an action. It is not your identity, and it's not who you are. And so no matter how separated we may feel that we are, or we think that we are, or we believe that we are, shame is actually just a part of the spiritual story in which all of us share. So my advice to you today, my encouragement to you today is never to allow shame to have the power that keeps you separated from community. And so for our time today, maybe it's an opportunity to talk about and share shame. Even if you don't want to get into details, that's fine, but share those feelings that invoke in each of us, because we can all relate to that feeling of being unworthy. Let's talk about that.